Hi, it's Charlie Minato from halfwheel.com, and this is a Waxing Moon humidor. Now, if you are unfamiliar with Waxing Moon, it is a very different humidor manufacturer than most companies that make humidors. Ed Sally started making humidors as a full-time profession in 2009, and it continues today. Ed is based in Minnesota, and that is where he makes the Waxing Moon humidors. Now, there are two major factors that sort of separate Waxing Moon from most other humidor companies. The first is that Ed makes the humidors, I think, by himself in Minnesota, and so there's not some sort of production line. And secondly, they're sold direct to consumer, and so there's also not some sort of like, we have to make 50 humidors to fulfill this order for the store. So because of that, there's a lot more customization options available if you decide to purchase a humidor from Waxing Moon. Now, there are 5 sort of standard series, and they vary in terms of like if you want to have just one type of wood species used versus, as you can see here, there's these sort of contrasting pieces here. There's also different like shapes. So this is much like a shoebox essentially, not really much spatial features, but you could get a humidor with that. Or if you wanted to have more exotic woods, he has series for that. 4 of the series are offered in 3 sizes. This would be an example of a medium-sized humidor. And there's also the option to customize them. So let's say you liked this humidor in general, but there were a few things you wanted to tweak. Maybe you wanted to have a custom inlay here. You wanted to have like your initials or something. Ed could do that. Maybe you don't want to use the Boveda packs and instead would like to use a Cigar Oasis. Ed could make a cradle for that and remove the Boveda pack holders. Maybe you want to have an exterior design, or I've even seen like mirrors on the inside. There are sort of endless customization possibilities within those 5 series, but there's also the option where Ed can just make a completely custom humidor. And I've seen pictures over the years of Waxing Moon humidors in all different shapes and sizes. Now, this sort of makes it difficult to like review it here at Halfwheel because I'm guessing that there are very few examples of identical Waxing Moon humidors, and the ones that do exist, I'm guessing, are probably sold to the same person that just wants multiple of the same humidor. But I felt like Waxing Moon was important to review because it's oddly like not prohibitively expensive. This sort of occupies that space where you've upgraded from the cheap of the cheap Chinese-made humidors. So now you're into the higher-end Chinese-made humidors. So that would be from like Ashton's Savoy or J.C. Newman's Diamond Crown. And then the next price point up, you kind of have Daniel Marshall and some European manufacturers, maybe like a Xeno humidor from Davidoff, right around that $1,000 for like a 100-count humidor mark. And then you have your Ellie Blues, Davidoff's Prometheus. It's sort of the top end of it. But this humidor was $700 shipped when we purchased it in June 2021. And looking at the Waxing Moon website today, those prices, at least as of early 2023, seem like they're probably still good. So if you compare this to one of those Savoys or a Diamond Crown humidor of a similar size, it's basically the same price. And I think that it's important to review it because this offers a very, very different experience, and obviously a lot of those customization options that those other companies do not offer and probably don't ever want to offer. So while a lot of Waxing Moon humidors are made to order, not all of them are made to order, and this is an example of one of those that was not. I originally thought that I was going to customize one of those like 5 series of humidors and make some changes and order it, but after a couple days of thinking about it and thinking about what customizations I'd like, I just decided it'd be easier to order this humidor, which was listed for sale on Waxing Moon's website, because this is probably 90-95% of what I would have ended up ordering anyways. Now, I'm going to put up the dimensions that were listed on the screen, but I measured the exterior dimensions a little bit differently. I actually measured it to be a bit wider than what it was listed at 15.375 inches from here to here. Not as deep, so 10.375 inches from here to here, and not as tall. It was about, 6.6 inches from here to here instead of 7 inches. You know, it is what it is. Opening up the humidor to sort of go over what's included, and as a reminder, pretty much all of this could be changed, but this is how this humidor came. There are these 2 non-removable Boveda holders. They're designed to hold 2 60-gram Boveda packs, so the standard size packs per holder for a total of 4 in the lid. This humidor does not have a magnetic lid, but that is an option. There are 2 removable trays, and the trays have, I think a better aesthetic than most trays, and also they have these 2 little pieces on the inside where you can grab onto it to help you pick them up and lift them out of the humidor. There are also 2 removable dividers at the bottom part of the humidor. They're a little bit different than most removable dividers. A lot of times you'll see like a piece of felt or something here with some foam on it, and the idea is that they're held into place via compression. These are not. Instead, there are slots that are drilled out or milled out. There are a total of 12 of these slots, so 3 different positions per divider because there's 2 on each side. I'm sure that if you wanted to, you could have more slots drilled or milled out. And then the final piece here is something called a crumb catcher. Now, Ed says on his website that he came up with this to actually catch crumbs near his toaster, but it has since been adopted for use on humidors. And it is this removable piece here that goes at the bottom. It certainly looks nice. Functionally, what it's supposed to do is to help with airflow. I don't claim to know how that would work or if it does work, but it does look nice. Now, you should note that one of the things that Waxing Moon does that it says separates itself from the competition is that it uses 1/4-inch thick Spanish cedar hardwoods for all of the interior. And that is great, and I'll get more to that in a second, but it does come at a cost when it comes to the interior space. And it's tough to sort of visualize because it's like 1/4 inch, that's not that much, but it does add up. So to visualize it, using these trays instead of just having it open, it actually costs 1 inch of width and 1/2 inch in terms of depth. And that's because this is a 1/4 inch thick, this is a 1/4 inch thick, that's a 1/4 inch thick, and that's a 1/4 inch thick. And that would be a full inch and then 1/2 inch in terms of the depth. Now, obviously, you could have one big tray made or some other combination of things. And, that's one of the better parts of the Waxing Moon experience. But the choice of woods, and specifically the type of wood, or at least the thickness of the wood, really does make a difference in terms of the interior space. So there is a testing procedure that I use for humidor reviews here at Halfwheel, and if you'd like to learn about that testing procedure and see how the Waxing Moon humidor did, you can go to the written review on halfwheel.com. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about 2 things that stand out from the testing procedure. The first is that the humidor worked pretty well. It's not the best that I've ever seen, but I don't have any concerns about the seal. During the sort of 90-day Bovida test where there were 6 69% Bovida packs in here, the humidor never really stayed at 69%. It seemed to be in the 65-66% range for most of this test. It never dipped below 62%, and the decline was pretty gradual. So no real concerns about the seal and about how well it would humidify your cigars if there's enough humidification inside of it. Number 2 is that the seasoning process took way longer than any other humidor that's gone through this testing procedure. I suspect that these 2 things share the same cause, and that's the amount of Spanish cedar that's inside of here and the density of that cedar. So what I would recommend if you purchase a new Waxing Moon humidor or another humidor that claims to use solid Spanish cedar and sort of 1/4 inch thick Spanish cedar is that I would use a lot more humidification than what you would otherwise think. So I would double the number of Bovida packs that you might use or double the number of Integra Boost packs. I wouldn't necessarily, at least initially, increase the percentage. So I wouldn't go from 69% packs to 72% packs. I'd save that as a last resort, but at least for seasoning and then the initial use after seasoning, this wood's probably a lot thirstier than what you're typically used to seeing in humidors, certainly what I've seen in humidors over the last couple of years, and I would just be prepared for that. So on to the pros and cons. I'm going to start off with the good stuff. Number 1 is that the humidor works, which is sort of the bare minimum test it needs to pass. So as I mentioned, not too concerned about the seal or the ability to keep humidity inside. The reason why I hope that you buy humidors is so that your cigars can be stored properly, and I think the Waxing Moon can do a great job at that. Number 2 is the value proposition. This is a 160 count, or advertises 160 count, Diamond Crown humidor from J.C. Newman. This is a Chinese-made humidor, one of the better Chinese-made humidors in my opinion. It's a commercial humidor, meaning that J.C. Newman has hundreds, if not thousands, of identical-looking humidors made each year in China, and it ships them all over the world where you can buy them at local stores or on the internet, etc. And the reason why I chose this humidor is because it's roughly the same size, at least interior-wise, as the Waxing Moon. This humidor probably can store more cigars. It doesn't have a tray, and trays tend to not be the most efficient way to pile up as many cigars inside, but more or less probably the same cigars can be stored in both humidors. The interesting part is that J.C. Newman sells a Diamond Crown humidor, 160 count Diamond Crown humidor with an MSRP of $685. Which means that this humidor, which is made in America, can be made to order, customized to your liking, and can hold roughly the same amount of cigars, is basically the same price. Now, there are trade-offs. This has got high gloss lacquer. This does not. This has a tray. The Diamond Crown does not. And, the trade-offs are going to keep going down. You're going to have to pick and choose what you want. Now, the Waxing Moon has the option to make a lot of these things, a possibility for you, whereas this is what JC Newman is going to sell you. And if you would like to customize it, you better be a woodworker. But price is oddly not one of those considerations because they're basically the same price. Now, number 3 is the customization. And I like the fact that you can customize a humidor. But what I think is even smarter is the idea that there are these 5 series that Waxing Moon makes that can serve as great starting off points. I can speak from experience. The idea of a blank sheet of paper, make a custom humidor from the ground up, and trying to figure out every single little detail and go back and forth, that seemed like it was going to be really daunting and overwhelming. And I'm sure that Waxing Moon has a great process for doing it. I also think a lot of people probably don't care all that much about it. And for those that do, there is the option to do it. But for people like me, you can sort of say, okay, I like more or less what this humidor is in terms of its size and its price. I'd like to change these 5 things about it. And Waxing Moon can easily sort of take care of it from there. And I think it's really, really smart. So before I get into the cons individually, I'm going to give an overview about the use of Spanish cedar in cigar humidors and why this one is so different. So I feel like most desktop humidors fall into one of 2 categories. Category A is that they don't use any Spanish cedar. That could be cheap humidors all the way up to really expensive ones. Davidoff, for example, uses okame wood in their interiors, does not use any Spanish cedar. Option 2, or category B, is what most humidors do. And so they use Spanish cedar veneer, which is a super thin sheet of Spanish cedar. It is actually from Spanish cedar, but it's not like a solid piece of wood. It's closer to paper than it would be to plywood at this point. And then it's glued on top of either a different type of plywood or in a lot of cases MDF, which is a wood composite. I am not a woodworker, but I've picked up there are a number of reasons as to why this is the case or why people like to use the Spanish cedar veneers. Obviously, they give the appearance and the smell of Spanish cedar. Most consumers probably aren't woodworkers and don't really know any better, and so they think that they're getting Spanish cedar, and in some ways they're getting a very, very small amount of Spanish cedar, but they don't really care beyond that. Think of it almost like kind of like gold plating versus using solid gold, and it's cheaper. So Spanish cedar is more expensive than a lot of MDF or a lot of just sort of generic plywoods. And number 2 is that Spanish cedar is not all that easy to work with, or at least it's more difficult to work with than a lot of other woods, and certainly like stable MDF. And that's because it's porous, which is what made it such a great choice for cigar humidors, particularly back in the day before more advanced humidification options became available, like beads or Boveda or electronic humidification. Because the wood's porous, it can absorb moisture, and then it will release that moisture in the form of humidity. And it creates what people like to call this microclimate inside of your humidor. It helped to make for a much more sort of stable process versus something like a plastic container that's either going to, keep the moisture in, but once you open it up, the moisture is just going to like escape more or less. It's not going to be absorbed within the plastic. So it's great for that. Unfortunately, though, because of all that, you do have to pay attention to it as a woodworker of like how much moisture is in the Spanish cedar and how much moisture is in the air of the room that we're storing the Spanish cedar in. And particularly when you go to build something, you have to be conscious of the idea that depending on how much moisture the wood is currently got in it versus how much it might get in it when the product is finished, it may contract or expand. And when it does that, it may destroy the product in any number of ways, cracking or things like that. Number 3 about reasons why you may not want to use Spanish cedar is because it isn't the easiest wood to live with as a consumer. And I've heard from at least one company that said they stopped using Spanish cedar interiors because of this particular issue. They just found that consumers were having too many issues, and they seem to be specifically related to using solid Spanish cedar. This humidor is an exception to those 2 categories. It uses 1/4-inch thick pieces of Spanish cedar. So there's no veneer, there's no MDF in the interior, nothing like that. It's what you see on the inside is 100% Spanish cedar. Now, unfortunately, there is at least one issue that is directly related to that decision. And when I open up the humidor, I'm going to have to zoom in to show you it, but right here, so in the lid, not here, but here on this bottom piece of the lid, there is resin or sap that has emerged. This is not an uncommon issue. I don't know how common it actually is, but it is something that has happened to other people before. I don't really know why it's specifically here versus in other parts of the humidor, but it's this sticky substance that's discolor the wood. The good news is that you can get rid of it. I've read about 2 common solutions. One of them would be to use sandpaper to sand it out. The other one would be to use alcohol to place it on there and get like a towel or a cloth and to remove it that way. Unfortunately, neither one of those are going to treat the actual problem. They're just going to treat the symptom. In order to do that, you probably need to seal the humidor, which would unfortunately take away the Spanish cedar smell and the porous nature of it. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do. Fortunately, I haven't had any cigars get damaged yet from the sap resin issue, but it certainly is something that is a concern, and it is something that is unique to using, or maybe not unique, but it is something that when you use solid Spanish cedar, the risks definitely increase versus if you use like okame or use the Spanish cedar veneers. Issues number 2 and 3 are related to one another. I don't know how much of them are related to the 1/4 inch thick Spanish cedar. I certainly think, based off what I know, that it probably isn't helping things. So issue number 2 is that the humidor isn't the easiest to open, and it's particularly not easy to open when it hasn't been opened for a couple weeks. Because of the filming, it's been a lot easier to open it now. But even now, if I place my fingers here and use the sort of slot that's created, not there, of course, because we're on video, but here we go. So I can lift up the humidor like this. The humidor weighs 14 pounds. It is very, very heavy. But it doesn't want to open all that easily. What I've been doing during the video that sort of masks this problem is putting a little bit of pressure on the bottom and then using my whole arm sort of as a fulcrum with an angle point here, which does make it a lot easier. Obviously, that's not how most people open up their humidors at home, so it's a lot more of a problem when not filming these videos. Issue number 3 is that the right corner, so this corner and this corner, the right front corner has become misaligned. The interior pieces are no longer as aligned as they once were, certainly compared to the other corners in the humidor. And when you close the humidor, or when I close the humidor, you can tell which side has an issue. So you can see that the line between the top and the bottom gets like thicker as this goes on, and that's because this humidor does not close flush in this corner. Now, this is like kind of noticeable here. It's very noticeable if I do this. So if I place some pressure here on the humidor, you can see that line closes as I place pressure, and as I take my hand away, it expands. So closing, expands, closing, expands. And if I go to the other side of the humidor, you can immediately notice this line's not as thick. I'll give you some reference points here. Like nowhere near as thick as this part right here, or other way around. And then when I go to place pressure on the left side of the humidor, you can see there's basically no movement. I have found that, generally speaking, when these two issues are happening in the same humidor, they're usually related. I can feel it. I can tell, like when I go to open up the humidor, like when I do this, that feels very different than when I go to do this. I can feel some of that pressure of where the wood is like sort of rubbing against itself or other pieces of wood inside of the humidor. Issue number 4 is the finish. This applies to both the exterior, but particularly the interior. It's just weird. Most of the time, humidors either get this right or get it terribly wrong. In this case, it's somewhere like in between, but part of that is because like a lot of the humidor doesn't have any issues, and there's just like some parts where it's like, that could be done a lot cleaner. So the trays are, I think, the best example of this. So all of these sort of slotted pieces need to connect with the exterior piece of the tray. And on the inside of the tray, there is visible glue on pretty much all of them. Oddly, like one side doesn't have any visible glue. Everywhere else there's visible glue. There's like visible glue on the sides here and some places inside of the slots. I don't really mind it all that much. And for $700, there's gonna be some trade-offs. This is not a $4,000 humidor, but it is a bit weird. Even weirder or more bizarre is that most of these slots are like sanded down really well. And then like every 4th or 5th slot looks like it didn't get the final like fine grit or even medium grit sandpaper, where there's just like a ton of like wood hairs. I don't know what the technical woodworking term is, but parts where it's like, that doesn't look like the other ones. So in the binary choice of would I recommend buying this humidor or would I not recommend buying this humidor, I can't recommend buying this humidor given the issues that have emerged, but I wouldn't be opposed to buying a waxing moon humidor. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to recommending that for some of you, you should consider it. I really like Waxing Moon's concept where you can customize some humidors. I like the fact that, it's a small business making unique humidors. The craftsmanship is just different in terms of how these humidors are produced. They are made differently than the Chinese-made humidors, and even some of the European-made humidors are made. And look, there aren't that many of these businesses around, and as somebody that owns Aristocrat humidors that are back there, which is a cabinet humidor maker that is no longer making humidors, you should enjoy them while they're here. So if you can be a patron of Waxing Moon, you should be. However, two things. Number one, these humidors are not for everyone. If you are a novice cigar smoker, novice humidor owner, don't buy a Waxing Moon now. You should wait until you've had some experiences, both good and bad, with humidors. If this is your fourth or fifth humidor that you're buying in your lifetime, I think you're probably in a safe space. But you should know how to troubleshoot some things. You should know what you're looking for in the seasoning process. You should have patience in seasoning, something that doesn't seem to happen with a lot of new smokers. And I certainly was in that boat once. Because otherwise, things are going to go poorly. This is a fickle humidor. It's going to require a bit more care, or a bit of different care than your run-of-the-mill Chinese-made humidors. And if you're not careful, it can go very, very wrong. But if you are, you can get a custom-made humidor for under $1,000. It's going to hold, 100 cigars, 100 plus cigars. Like, that's a unique thing and not something that's necessarily going to be around forever. Secondly, in terms of sort of the recommendations or things you should know going into buying a Waxing Moon humidor, you should know what you're paying for. You're paying for a different manufacturing process. You may think it's better. You may not think it's better. It's up to you. But you shouldn't expect this to be sort of the run-of-the-mill Chinese-made humidor. It's going to have pros and cons compared to that. And as long as you kind of understand what you're getting and aren't thinking that just because this is a custom-made one-off humidor that you're buying, that it's going to be as such perfect, I think you're okay. If you're expecting it to be perfect, you should expect to pay LE Blue type prices, of which this is not. For more reviews of humidors and other cigar accessories as well as cigars, you should check out halfwheel.com, where we also publish information that's happening with anything related to the cigar business, whether that be new cigars, new cigar accessories, regulations and legislation that affects cigars, editorials, and other things like that. Can all be found on halfwheel.com, as well as a written review of this particular humidor that goes into depth into some other things that I did not cover in the video.